Hello and welcome to MalMakes. Today we're doing a painting inspired by the Unfinished Swan. This is the full version. If you're interested in the time-lapse, you can click on the card here. Otherwise, let's get started. Over on Stephen Plays, we played through the Unfinished Swan, and I really love the concept of it. It was a really cool idea for a game, so I definitely wanted to paint it. Now, dripping paint on a canvas, I can do vertically like this, but when there gets to be too much, it's going to run down the canvas. So I'm going to be working flat when I start using the actual paint, but in order to keep all of those nice shapes, like the tree I'm going to be putting in, I need to cut out a stencil so I can make all of those nice shapes, put the paint on the canvas, and then peel it up and keep those nice shapes on the canvas. So we're going to be working flat to also cut out those stencils. For something like this, I prefer to work flat, so I've moved everything I need out here onto the table. And I've put down a self-healing mat to protect the table, but it also kind of helps the knife cut smoother. So I have my cutting knife, my X-Acto blade with a new blade in it. I have a pencil, an eraser, a metal ruler that's big enough for what I'm going to be doing. I have some clear tape to hold it down because, as you're going to see, it's pretty curly and it's harder to draw on it and keep it from moving around on you when you're cutting. And then I have the product I'm using, and this product is called Mask Ease. There's actually two I found that are similar to this. I found this originally when I was still teaching. We were doing these screen printing stencils with paper, and it's really hard to have something float. So if you were cutting out the letter O, you would have a donut in the middle, and you want that to be in there for your screen print so it looks like the letter O. But if you cut it on paper, it falls out and then it's just a big circle. So this is something that's sticky that you can stick to stuff and screen print on if you didn't have emulsion or something else, or you couldn't use emulsion for whatever reason. So this is a great alternative to using that for screen printing. But we're gonna make it work for this, for acrylic painting, by doing a couple extra little steps with it. So this is what I'm using, and it comes with two pieces inside. And they come like this. There's a yellow one and then this clear one on this white paper. So they both have a backer and they're both sticky. And the yellow one is the actual Mask Ease part of this. And you can draw right on this yellow, whatever you want to use for your little stencil. And the goal is, when you cut, is to cut just the yellow and not all the way through. If you cut all the way through, it's not a big deal, but it's a lot easier if you don't. And with the new blade, it should work really well. I'll be able to just very lightly cut and won't have to push too hard to cut the yellow, and it won't cut through this backer paper. And then this is for transferring it onto your canvas, and it's harder to explain and easier to show, and kind of showing it in steps. So when I get to that part, I'll be explaining exactly how you use this clear part to transfer the yellow over to your canvas. So there's actually two different products that basically do the same thing. This Mask Ease I used on the top two rows, and then I used a product called Art Mask on the bottom two. And they work pretty much the same. I just preferred this one because I could work on it separately, like here on the table. The other one is basically the yellow part without the transfer paper and then without the backing. It's just the sticky part wrapped around a tube, kind of like tape. So you basically put it on the canvas and then draw on that, and then cut right here on the canvas with it on top. And then you can peel up from there. And it kind of made me nervous to cut right on top of the canvas, but if you look at the back, I didn't really puncture it or go through. I was just worried about doing that the entire time. So that's kind of why I preferred this, and this stuck a little bit better to canvas. So it worked really well for what I was doing. Now, this row and this row are the high flow, and then this row and this row are the heavy body. So with these ones, I could drip the paint right out of the bottle. I could use a toothbrush and kind of splatter it like I did here. For the heavy body, what I had to do is I had to dip a brush in it and just kind of tap the canvas. So it doesn't look as pretty or as speckled as Unfinished Swan should. So that's why I'm going with the high flow. And then what I did in this column is it's all the product by itself. I just stuck it down on the canvas, put down the paint, peeled it up, and saw what happened. As you can see with these high flow ones here, it's seeped underneath really bad. And I've actually done some prep work on these canvases to make them a little smoother, which I'm going to show you after I do the drawing part. And that didn't help at all. As you can see, it got really bad on these two with the high flow. And then this column here, I used a soft gel media that I put down first. It's basically a clear paint. So it kind of sealed everything in, and I could just splatter on top of that just fine. Didn't have any problems except kind of right here with it seeping underneath. And then over here, I used a different medium, a polymer medium, that's basically also just a clear paint. It's just a different one that Golden has, and it worked just as good. They're pretty comparable for all of the different shapes. But I liked how the soft gel gloss applied best, so that's the one I'm going to be using when I get to that step to seal everything down. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to unwrap one of these and start by cutting out how much I need to do my first part of my stencil. And I think I might do 2 or 3 on this, depending on how much I can cut. And I'm going to be starting with everything from this water line up. So kind of this little bit of a path going back, the tree for sure. And I'm going to leave all of the reeds and the cattails and the rocks for another stencil. Now that I have my piece cut, you can see that it's really cumbersome to work with when it's large because it just rolls up all the time. If you're working on a smaller piece, it's not as bad because it's not rolling as much, but when you have something that's like 20 by 30 inches like I did, it's a lot easier when it's smaller. So now that it's taped down to the board here, I can start to sketch in where I want things to go. So if I want the water to kind of sit here, and kind of go back in space like this, I'm going to sketch in the tree and also kind of how I want the path to go. That part's going to be a little strange because it's not going to really have any hard edges, but I'm still going to sketch it in so I know where that area is. Now that I have everything drawn on this piece, I can take my X-Acto knife and just start to cut. Now, I don't want to push too hard or I'll go all the way through, which isn't a really big problem, but I should try to avoid that if I can. So I'm just going to start on these edges and just kind of lightly drag the knife across the vinyl. Now I'm cutting out pieces of the tree and then peeling them up. Just trying to be really careful that I don't accidentally take out any parts that I want to stay pure white canvas. Everywhere that's going to get any of the high flow ink, I'm peeling that part back. I've peeled up everywhere that's going to get paint later, and what I want to do next is take this clear and put it on top of the sticky side down, and it's kind of tricky to do when it's all rolly like this. So what I tend to do is take one side and kind of unstick it from the backing and set it down, and then just kind of unstick it from the roll and stick it down to the yellow all in one motion, where I kind of just unroll it on top of this. The last thing I have to prep before painting is the canvas itself. Normally I don't do any prep work, they're pre-gessoed. I kind of like the texture of the canvas, but in order to make that mask ease stick really good, I need to sand it a little bit, and then I'm going to cover it with some of this thick white gesso, and then after it dries, sand it just a little bit more. And I may do that a second time depending on how it goes the first time, but that's going to help make it a bit smoother before I start the actual painting part. To sand it, I just have this sanding sponge so it's a little bit softer because I can kind of push it a little bit. And I'm just going to set this down and kind of go in circles all the way around the canvas. I brought the canvas into the studio and I laid some plastic down and made sure everything was protected around this, just so I don't get paint anywhere. And I want to do this flat just because I want to get some big splatters of paint and I don't want them to run down the canvas. Now I did do 2 coats of gesso and I ended with a sanding just to make sure it was nice and smooth, but that does create some dust. So I'm just going to take a damp towel and wipe everything down just to pick up any of that extra dust. With all of the prep work done, I can get started on doing actual painting. So I have all of those mask ease stencils I made with the clear on top of the yellow. So I've just peeled up that clear like I did earlier and just stuck it down to all of them. Now I can take the clear and peel it up with the yellow and just separate it from that backing like so. And you can see right here how it leaves that clear. And I'm just going to unpeel this entire thing from this backing paper and then stick it down to the canvas. Once I have it stuck down, I can just peel up the clear part and leave the yellow stuck down. Then I'm just going to make sure everything's really stuck down by using this back side of this blade. This side isn't the sharp side, so I can just kind of use it to make sure everything's stuck down really good and that there's no air bubbles. Okay, so using the back of that blade actually left some marks on the canvas, kind of like a pencil, and an eraser took care of most of them, but I'm just going to grab some more gesso and just recover this part up. Now that the gesso is dry, I'm going to put down a layer of soft gel gloss, and it's just a medium that you can mix with paint. I could tint this any color I wanted. There's a lot of things you can do with this, and this is what I used for my isolation coats when paintings are done. I use this in a 2-to-1 mix with water. So I'm just using it straight from the bottle today, and I'm just using one of these little foam brushes, and I'm applying it all over the entire part where the paint is going to go. And it's mostly just to kind of seal in between like the canvas and the yellow part, but I'm going to do it everywhere just to make it consistent in texture, so it's nice and smooth. The soft gel layer is dry, so what I'm doing next is I'm going to start applying the black, and I'm using just an old toothbrush, and I'm using just a little bit of high flow carbon black. And I'm just going to touch the top of the bristles into this paint, and then I'm going to go over to the canvas and pull them back and then just kind of flick them onto the canvas. Pretty good, but there's a little bit of touch-up I have to do. So you can probably see this a little bit right here and a little bit on the trunks of the trees and where some of the branches didn't quite get any paint. So I'm just going to take this paint marker that has the same paint I used to splatter, and I'm just going to kind of touch up those areas and make them a bit rounder. Also, some areas like this, there's a little bit here, and then just a few little spots all over in the tree. I'm just going to take some gesso and touch those parts up. My next layer is the rock layer, and when I had kind of drawn this out to figure out where things are going, this top corner I kind of lined up with this top line where this hits on the side of the canvas. So my plan is to kind of unstick the backing paper and stick it there and just kind of go left along the entire canvas. And I did that because I want this top rock to overlap a little bit of this black part, and by doing it this way, it's definitely going to do that. I've protected everything around the mask, and I did that with paper, and unlike the last time, I taped all the way across. Because when I did the last one, I had only done tape in a few spots, the splatter had kind of gotten underneath and left marks like right here on the canvas, which is fine. I just re-gessoed it so it was solid white again, but to prevent that from happening, I taped everything off this time. Now, one of the things I thought about doing was like repainting where the paint is showing through, like with these rocks here, but because I want like the top part here to be solid black, I'm not going to do it on this instance of my stencil. Maybe when I'm doing another one, I'll want some more white in it, like when I'm doing the cattails here, I'll want them to be partially white. So after I put that stencil down, I'll probably add some white, but in this case, I don't need to do that. But just like the last one, I'm going to be using some soft gel gloss and giving this a good coat to kind of seal it down to the canvas. Now I have two different ways of applying paint by splattering. Normally I use the toothbrush and it kind of does these smaller dots, but I also bought this splatter paintbrush by Liquitex. Now from what I've seen, it tends to do a bit bigger drops, which I kind of want to do when I get closer to like the foreground here. So some of these front rocks and then the big land that I'm going to have here in the corner. So I'm going to try that first, and then I can always use the toothbrush to add in some smaller ones on the further rocks. Now I'm just getting the bristles wet, just the very, very tip of these long bristles. And then I'm going to kind of work it in so they all have some of it on there. And then I'm just going to pull it all back and then let go. So you can see these dots are a lot bigger than those little ones. It's a little bit more chaotic, it's going everywhere, but it's nice that some of the dots are bigger. The other thing I'm doing is I'm taking this liquid paint marker, which has the same liquid in it that I'm using for splattering, and just kind of fill in the tops of these rocks so they're a little bit more solid, and then I'm just going to fade it down into the splatter part. To differentiate between like the water and the sky, the water gets these reflections where we kind of have a light gray fading down into plain white as it gets away from all of the objects that sit in the water. So I'm going to start by doing this edge back here of like the landmass, and I taped off these two rocks. I didn't have to do that, but I didn't want to like turn this part gray, so I just put a little bit of a line down to make sure I stopped when I got there. Now I've mixed up some of the liquid carbon black that I used for the splattering and some of the white gesso to make kind of a darker gray color, and I'm going to lay that down right along this edge here and then use some glazing liquid to kind of make it transparent as it comes down from that edge. found that dripping the high flow from like higher up really has an effect on it kind of hitting the canvas. So you can see that these drips kind of have like these trails that come off from them. So I like that effect better, but it works really good on these things that are close up instead of these things back here that are really far away. So the splatter should be smaller on them because you're seeing them at a distance. I also kind of used the gloves to finger paint. When I dripped it down, it made like a big puddle here on the canvas, and in order to make that less thick, I just kind of put my finger on top and tapped it like it was a drum. And then for a few spots, I just had all this paint on my glove, so I just kind of added a few more drips, but I didn't want it to look like a glove touched it, so I made sure I grabbed a lot of extra paint and then just kind of filled those areas in. And there's a few places where the paint is still really thick, so I think I might just dab it a little bit with a paper towel so it's not super liquid, and then I'll peel up all of my protective layers here. I started laying out my cattails and I realized I made a mistake. On one of these, I made it too wide and too short. So like this one is 2 by 3, so it's 2 wide and 3 tall, and it should have been like 3 wide and 2 tall. So it's too tall for where it was supposed to go over here. But this one is pretty close, and this one was supposed to be where this one is. So I just switched them just to kind of fill that in. And then for the bottom of this, I'll just kind of set it lower than these ones here so the tops meet, and then I'll just cover this with gesso so I don't get any splatter paint there. So I laid everything out, made sure it's where I want it to go. I took some notes with the change so I wouldn't forget. And then I also made some notes, like I want this 3 by 5 one, that's this really big one here, to kind of wrap around the edge. So I took notes to make sure that I would put it down and then wrap it after I set it down on the canvas. Things like that. So I took those notes here in my sketchbook, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to start by putting down these two, because these two are the furthest ones away, and I'm going to do those first. And once I have those down, I may do these in addition at the same time, so then I'll stick these 3 down too, because they're all kind of the same and they're going to get the same size splatters like these rocks back here. But I want to make sure that when I put them down, it's easy enough for me to protect all of the canvas around them. If it's hard where things are all different levels and all over the place, like it's harder to protect the canvas, and that's my utmost concern. I don't want to mess up what I've already done. So I'm going to stick these ones down first and then see if I can do these at the same time. Because these are further away, I'm going to be using the toothbrush to do the splatter on these. And I don't want to cover up too much because they are sitting on top of black. If I cover them as much as I did the ground, you won't see them. So I just want to kind of do a light spattering of black ink on top of them. addition to a little bit of touch-up, all of the cattails also get the shading in the water. So I'm just going to do the same thing I did with all of the ground and the rocks, but I'm going to freehand it just because there's so many of them and it'd be really hard to tape off all of these different cattails all the way across. And we're done! We have a scene inspired by the Unfinished Swan. If you're interested in this piece, you could buy a poster or a phone case, or bid on this original canvas. There's links down below. Also, consider supporting me on Patreon. You can find out more at supportmal.com. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss future episodes of MalMakes, and I'll see you again here for another video game painting.